Emergency planning. During the 1980s, emergency planning was a county-level function, although there was a heavy reliance upon the cooperation of the district council authorities to provide information. For almost the entire decade, the county emergency planning officer was one Victor Woolen, who kindly gave me his recollections of how emergency planning evolved in the county. Background. I had joined the Civil Defence Corps as a volunteer in 1957 in the Wakefield Division. Then in 1962 I took the post of training officer in the Civil Defence section of the Wakefield Corporation. As part of that role I attended a number of courses at the Easingwold Civil Defence Training School. However, in 1968 Harold Wilson's government abolished the Civil Defence Corps, and so I became Mayor's Secretary at Wakefield Town Hall, and Civil Defence was then non-active and planning was on a care and maintenance basis. In 1974, the West Yorkshire Metropolitan County Council was formed and I became Assistant County Emergency Planning Officer based at a dedicated emergency planning office at 14 Rishworth Street in Wakefield. We only stayed at that location for about a year until we moved to Rains House. By 1978 the county emergency planning officer retired and so I succeeded him, and by now the team was occupying an office in Burton Street, although we had been at County Hall in between time. The 1980s and County War Plan. At the turn of the decade the county emergency planning team was headed up by myself with 4 assistants plus some administrative support. Over the next 18 months we produced the West Yorkshire County Emergency War Plan 1982. This document is on full public record at the majority of county libraries. The plan took no account of what targets were likely to hit, but my own view is that these would have been strictly military, of which there was a limited number within the county. We had to present Part 1, which covered areas such as control and activation of the plan and the chain of communications to the F6 branch of the Home Office. When F6 responded to what we had produced, they were very complimentary and asked if we could distribute it to counties who were struggling with producing their own plans. The other parts of the plan, such as emergency feeding and accommodation of the homeless, were issued subsequently as individual sections, but it was not necessarily to submit these. In any case, compilation of these additional parts was very much dependent upon the quality of information we received back from the district councils, who had to nominate premises for use. This was a particularly difficult task as all of the districts had attained a nuclear-free zone status and were therefore reluctant to assist us. Home Office. F6 was the Fire and Emergency Planning Division of the Home Office, responsible for nuclear war planning. There was nothing special or secretive about the F6 title, as all Home Office branches were coded according to the office locations they occupied. F6 was a small team headed by an assistant secretary, consisting of 1-star level military people. They oversaw production of plans, produced regulations and guidance, managed emergency planning grant payments, arranged exercises and planned where the government were to have dispersed. Abolition of the county council. Mr. Woolen continued.
In 1986 the government abolished the county council, which was really down to the fact that politically it had been Labour-dominated, and emergency planning was absorbed into the new West Yorkshire Fire and Civil Defence Authority (WIFCDA). However, we remained in our Burton Street offices for some 6–8 months after the changeover. Also, the team was to grow to 5 assistants, with the loss of 2 due to retirement and the recruitment of 3 more from other areas of the county council. I was then able to allocate 1 assistant per district authority to be a point of contact within the team.
West Yorkshire Fire and Civil Defence Authority. Political control of the new authority was under the chairmanship of Kirklees councillor Lawrence Conlon, Labour, who had led Kirklees Council up until then. Now retired, Mr. Conlon takes up the story. The previous county council functions were redistributed amongst the districts, each taking a lead authority role over a particular area. For instance, Leeds took transport, Wakefield the police, and Kirklees took the new WYFCDA. Emergency planning had its own subcommittee chaired by Councillor Denise Atkinson, which met every 2 months for approximately half an hour. But remember, I myself was a Labour councillor and Kirklees Council was by then Labour-dominated, so my intentions were that the policy on civil defence would be one of minimum compliance. Therefore, it is probably fair to say that the activities of the emergency planning team came under closer scrutiny now than it had been at the county council. As part of this closer scrutiny, the team was moved to the offices above the main county fire station on Kirkstall Road, which was under the direct control of the chief fire officer. However, moving the team also had a financial benefit. As emergency planning was 100% grant assisted by the Home Office, we could actually charge them a high level of rent for occupying our own office space. We then used that money to reinvest in the fire service generally. Eventually, of course, the Home Office stopped that element of the grant, but it had helped push up the cost of emergency planning to them to almost £250,000 per annum. There in essence was the balance to be struck. The policy was of minimum compliance, however, we still needed to satisfy F6 that enough was being done to justify the grant payments that were being made to us. To do this, each year we were called down to London for a meeting to explain our activities and how far we had got with our preparations. They may have pulled us up on a few things such as not enough rest centres nominated and such like, but our grant for the next year was usually approved. In 1989 Victor Woolen retired, and this presented us with an opportunity to get our own man in. Therefore, the clinching factor of our new appointment was the fact that he was a member of CND. He had impressed us greatly at interview and appeared very knowledgeable. And of course his CND affiliation reinforced our minimum compliance policy.
Reflection. To conclude, Mr. Woolen looked back at the period.
A combination of minimum compliance by the WYFCDA, resistance to assist by district councils, and the requirements to maintain the grant by F6 always made the job extremely difficult. In terms of my own wartime role, I had discussed with my wife the possibility that I would be needed at County Hall in an emergency. When you reach a position of authority such as emergency planning officer or chief executive, I feel you have a responsibility to the service of the public. Particularly the chief executive, as they are the lead officer of the authority. It is up to people in those positions to carry on the functions of the council as long as possible. In any event, I don't agree that the emergency planning officer's role stops after the plans have been produced. They can be there assisting those who have to interpret and implement them. Yes, we came close during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, but I was always quite confident that the theory of mutual assured destruction, or MAD as it was known, would prevent war, which of course has been proven right.